Okay, welcome back everybody. So my name is John Goodall. I'm a professor here in civil engineering. I'm also associate director for the Link Lab. And I'm gonna be moderating the panel discussion now about smart cities. So first, let me just frame a little bit about the panel and kind of the question, the overall question that we want to ask and explain it. And then I'll introduce the panelists to you. So our question really is smart cities, what and why? A smart city foundation for all communities. So what we want to have this conversation really be about is in part thinking about how smart cities, and this was mentioned before by Heather, smart cities is not maybe the exact right term. So maybe it's connected communities or smart places, as Jacobs was calling it. But this idea of having more connection within communities, how can this be done in an effective way, not just for the large cities within the country and world, but also for smaller communities as well. So, and not just for communities with a lot of resources, but potentially disadvantaged communities as well. So we want to think about that very broadly and understand how technology can come to bear for that broad range of kind of all communities. All right, so with that, I want to introduce the panelists and thank them for their time and sharing their insights here on this question. First is Bill Pugh, managing partner for Smart Connections which is a nonprofit. Bill has over 25 years of experience in wired and wireless strategies for platform development and networking technologies for several private and public entities. For the last 5 years or so, he's been working on strategies and executing smart cities initiatives around street lights, smart parking, intelligent traffic, and security. Next is Chris Kimmerer. He's the director of Smart City Enterprise Architects for Verizon. And Chris is in that role. He is responsible for leading a team of engineers and others working on creating and developing standards around the design, implementation, and support of smart community solutions. Again, around these ideas of lighting and traffic and public safety and security. But he's got a lot of experience working closely with governments, enterprises, technology providers, and others in implementing these solutions. And last is Lucas Ames. Lucas Ames is from right here in Charlottesville. He's the founder of a nonprofit called Smart Cville. And Smart Cville is actually a partner here with the Link Lab in connecting with the local community. And it's been a really important partner for us in having a civic innovation partnership between the city and the various entities within the university and the city government. So even for a small town like Charlottesville, there's still a lot of difficulty and effort that has to come into play for academics whose our main job is not to interface with government, but we need these partnerships to be successful in our research. So Luke has been very helpful in formulating and helping us navigate that with our local community. All right, so I want to now just kind of pose a couple questions for the panel. And so the plan here today is to spend, we are starting a little bit late, so we're going to try to catch up a little bit. So maybe 45 minutes or so, kind of thinking about some of the questions I have and having a discussion. And then we want to open it up for discussion more broadly. So if you have any questions related to what the panelists have said, or even the speakers earlier, what they said, we can have an open discussion. And since we're cutting it a little bit short, we're actually still going to try to end at 4:30. But I want to make sure everyone knows that we're going to have a social gathering at Cardinal Hall, which is a local bar in town. So we can move that extra 15 minutes of open discussion and get that going at Cardinal Hall if everyone's available to do that. So, okay, so my first question really that I'm curious about and like the panelists to weigh in on is really this question between small communities or smaller communities and the large cities. So what do you see as potential advantages or disadvantages working with smaller communities versus larger communities? Do you see the technology solutions needed for these communities being different or approaches being different, or do you see a lot of similarity across that divide of small to larger communities? And Bill, if you want to.
So I can tell you, my preference is smaller cities for a number of reasons. My number one city, the very first city that I worked with was Palo Alto. And so they're not a normal city. They are the company of Palo Alto. They own their own utility, their own everything. So it's all, local. 65,000 people. The CIO was adventurous. Jonathan Recontile was just, he's just like, yeah, we want to do that. Let's go do it. So he kind of let me go. The problem there was I spent my first year and a half building a vision for them, which I want to get out and get my hands dirty. That was a challenge, getting me used to the kind of public sector part of it. Big cities, San Diego is another one of mine, and I can't get anything done. It just takes forever. Although they have done one thing with that I think is not publicized enough, and that is FRED. FRED stands for Free Ride Everywhere Downtown, and that was funded by automating their parking. And they took the revenues and savings from that to incorporate electric vehicles that anywhere downtown, if you have the app, you can get a ride anywhere. So I like small cities, but I like big cities as well.
Yeah, it sounds largely because you can see that impact very quickly.
Faster. Yeah, they're more agile, less red tape, easier procurement system.
What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think the technology that they're implementing is all very similar. The scale is significantly different. So the scale of the issues and the challenges and the concerns, the amount of traffic you're dealing with, is much different. The technology is technology, right? Managed, traffic signals are traffic signals. The standards that you're dealing with phase data is the same in here as it is LA, right? It's the standards are the standards. The issues are the issues. The scale of those issues are different. I would say that from a Verizon perspective, as we work with the different cities, smaller cities being able to move faster, get constituent engagement and agreement more quickly than a large city is all very positive. So I've seen small cities being able to engage their citizens, get buy-in from their citizens on particular projects, and being able to implement and move through the approval processes much faster than large cities. It's no different than working with Verizon versus working with a smaller company, right? We have a lot of steps that have to be followed. I also see that smaller cities have the ability to get past perceived, not regulatory issues, but things like privacy. If you go into a Seattle and you start talking about hanging video cameras on traffic poles where I'm going to monitor traffic, you're going to get 1,000 citizens raising their hand and said, absolutely not. This is a privacy issue. You can't record this data. Where are you storing the data? Who's storing the data? Who has access to the data? Whereas smaller cities tend to be able to get through some of those hurdles faster by engaging citizens, by having that relationship with their citizens. But again, so.
Do you feel like that's just a trust issue that with a smaller community, maybe there's more trust within that community of decision makers in some sense, and maybe potentially that's why.
It could be. It could be. And there are those cities that are just incredibly sensitive to privacy laws and things like that. So.
Lucas, do you see it differently?
So we work mostly here in Charlottesville, but talk to a lot of different municipalities throughout Virginia in particular. And I think I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I will say sometimes in small cities, it's hard to move things along if there isn't a vision. And so you really need to have, small or big city, someone who is the visionary for what the foundation of a smart city is going to look like. So I'm not saying necessarily here, but that I've worked with some cities where perhaps that vision was absent. And so then in that case, I do think it's the role of community-based organizations, academics, and such to say, hey, here's some things we should be thinking about and try and move the culture a little bit forward. Because I do think, in small city, the people who work in local government, they're your neighbors, sometimes your friends, you see them out. And so I do think once you get over that hurdle or find a vision or make those connections, things may be able to roll pretty quickly. The other thing to think about too is, when you talk about like a CIO, I kind of chuckle a little bit and thinking about what a CIO could look like here, or like a chief data officer or a chief innovation officer or something like that. Like, those don't exist here. When you're talking, in Charlottesville, we have an I team, right? And it's this disparate group of essentially like go-getters in city government. And that's fantastic, but it is a little bit more, it's harder. There's heterogeneous interest there, and it's sort of harder to pave one single vision forward. So that said, somebody comes in, a great city manager who's really interested in this stuff, I do think it can roll pretty quickly.
Yeah. So it sounds like across all three, I mean, obviously the leadership, the vision, someone saying, yes, this is something we want to do, it has to be in place before anything else can kind of come through. Yeah. And so my next question is really geared towards what we're trying to do here in the Link Lab. So, I mean, we have a vision in the Link Lab of being somewhat different from maybe your traditional academic model, where it's been mentioned a number of times, public-private partnerships. And I sort of know what that means as academic, but I wonder also about public-private academic partnerships. And so not the academic as someone who's kind of disconnected somewhat from what's actually happening in industry, not someone who's doing exact consulting work necessarily, but somehow partnering and helping to potentially push the vision forward. So we've learned a lot over the last, today and even yesterday about what's happening in industry, what's happening in government, and how can we kind of align some of the research that we're doing here in the university to help address those issues. I know from the industry side, hiring our graduates is of much interest. And so I think there's both educational and research partnerships that could happen. I'm curious to hear from each of you what your vision might be for more active partnerships with nonprofits, with government, with academia in particular. And maybe if you could also be honest about what hasn't worked well in the past that could be done better from the academic side.
I think, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for academia to partner with not only cities but companies as well to kind of create that three-legged stool of getting things done. With the amount, sitting on the other side of the table when I'm talking to cities and there are meetings that are taking place. How many times I hear my data platform, and everybody and their uncle has a data platform. Mm-hmm. It would be great to partner with the city, someone like Verizon and academia to kind of say, look, we're going to look at these data platforms. We're going to kind of give you an apples to apples comparison. Mm-hmm. The cities are oftentimes, from my experience, looking for how do we close the gap? How do we get to a decision faster without having to go through these long, arduous, RFP processes? We can still go through the RFP process, but be better written in the RFP. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a great opportunity there. I have not had any bad experiences with academia yet. So
how many experiences have you had?
Well, being from the Bay Area with Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, and all.
What has the
others,
experience been primarily?
It's kind of been the opposite. Carnegie Mellon partnered with Palo Alto as well, and just got the okay to go ahead and deploy a bunch of traffic sensors and show the city how they were going to collect the data and how they could use the data. Stanford donated a bunch of resources and said, "Hey, city, use them the way that you want, and they'll do a lot of your intern work for you." You need to, when I asked for their open data, they gave it to me, and I was like, it's CSV files and XML files. I don't know what to do with that. They were like, Stanford said, here, give it to them.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Chris.
So yeah, so I mean, we are very dependent on universities. Just an example, in Hungary, we have over 100 students every day working on our video analytics. So as we look at things like intersection safety or traffic management that are using video cameras, people have to sit there and crunch those images and say that's a person walking in that location at that street
Students
right
are good at
now,
that, yep.
and then now, and then now, and every frame has to be analyzed. We're getting better and better at machine learning, so that eventually you need less and less people manually doing this. But we rely heavily on universities to help with the analytics that are needed to feed machine learning, so that the machines can get smarter and smarter. We provide that data to a bunch of the universities that can then do whatever they want with the data. Look at, in fact, upstairs, and I forget the nice young lady who was presenting it to me, but she was talking about the data feeds from traffic systems and how they can crunch that data and come up with situational awareness and say, well, if I route traffic this way, but then there's a ambulance coming this way, what do I do? They can use that data. We feed that data into the universities. So I think it works really well. I think where it could work better is, so as we look at public-private partnerships and, a Verizon is working with a given city and says, we're going to give you this, we're going to get this. One of the things that all cities are interested in, all cities, are whether it's universities or even high schools. What can Verizon do to help fund, feed, establish curriculum, if you will, or internships or some type of STEM program for the given community. And I think we having a clear plan on what you are going to do is prior to simply putting money into it, saying, look, this is what we're hoping to accomplish, right? We want these students, we want to try to orient their efforts around these projects, and having a clear plan for how you are going to use the money is really important. If not, you have money searching for a problem. So that's one of the things I think we could probably do a better job in.
Yeah, I think it's been great working with the Link Lab. It's been somewhat different than other academic partnerships we've pursued. We've tended to have a lot of yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. And I think the nice thing about working with you all is there's a little bit more of a yes and that has allowed us to move pretty quickly with some great ideas and projects. And so I think it's been fantastic. And I think always part of my vision for Smart Civil was sort of connecting this really educated community with local government that does have some capacity issues with also the citizens at large. So I think I'm pretty excited about it. I think one of the things that gets lost sometimes when you're starting to talk about academic and private partnerships is that each of those two entities have very specific interests and things driving them. And what I often see gets lost is who we're doing this for, which is the user, or in the case, the citizen, right? And so we very quickly get into this oh, this is really cool, very heady, great, exciting stuff that totally forgets about why we're doing this, which is improved service delivery, a better citizen experience. And so that sort of user-based design, I think without real intentionality, is hard for academic private partnerships to pursue. It's possible, but I do think it can be challenging just given the inherent pulls that drive both academia and the private sector.
All right. So my next question is really kind of on the research side. So, do you see where do you see kind of the research over the next 5 years really kind of being needed in this kind of smart city space? Is there a particular area that you think is underserved or needs more attention within the research community, or is it just kind of broadly over everything, or particular insights you have from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously autonomous vehicle, is huge, right? Because I think it's going to hit every one of these cities that just have a lot of legacy infrastructure. that we need to look at being replaced and how that infrastructure, interacts with, the car, the driver, et cetera. So I think an autonomous vehicle is going to be significant. Another one is public safety. So from a research perspective, how to improve overall public safety in cities, leveraging technologies is going to be another area that I think will be big. They're all, environmental sustainability is huge in these cities. Being able to address natural disasters, things like that, all goes back to I lump that all into public safety.
Right. It sounds like you're thinking on kind of the application side. It sounds like a lot of what you were saying are just kind of how do you map the technology to potential applications.
To potential applications and challenges. But I think, whether it's mobility and transportation, whether it's public safety, whether it's sustainability, are all need a significant amount of caring and feeding. Nobody has solved the problem and said, we're good. This one's solved. Let's move on to the next one.
Lucas or Bill?
Go ahead.
So I agree. I mean, for me right now, and the reason that the majority of the cities that I even work with are all addressing traffic is that the vision. Every single one of those cities' vision starts with Vision Zero being their number one initiative. It's Vision Zero, reduce traffic congestion, improve throughput, and all of that, and then. So I think from a research perspective, it's more along the lines of not so much technology looking for a problem to solve, but really looking at what are the city's visions, and then how does technology actually address that. And then I was happy to hear today, I kept hearing the term data fusion, because I'm like, okay, so now how do cities really use this? Because the mashing up of traffic data or the improvement upon any corridor or thoroughfare definitely has an impact on the environment. And so if you can take that data and the environmental data and show that because of the throughput through a corridor that your CO2 was improved, your greenhouse gas emissions were, improved, I think that's a significant win. So something along the lines of matching up data sets and how they solve problems across a vertically integrated organization.
Which kind of speaks to the open data, the interoperability kind of discussion that kind of
Yes.
came out a little bit earlier.
Yes.
In talks, the need for that.
Yeah, from the application side, I totally agree that, what we hear most from citizens is transit is a big one. What we hear on the local government side, though, is actually environment. So it's interesting you said that, because that's where I always see like a ton of energy and interest around environmental sustainability. But I think, one of the things from a research perspective, and this isn't a specific topic, but it is something with all of this, the smart city movement, the increase in data, this is actually putting, even if cities do nothing, it's putting a pretty significant burden on staff, and quite often staff who are not data experts on what to do with it, how to analyze it. And so I think there is a really interesting research question that's very broad, but could be honed down into specific interest areas in terms of like, how do you automate that analysis and provide insight to staff so that they can take action on the insight, as opposed to having to do the analysis and the data, the hard work. So if that's machine learning or AI, but I think there's a variety of different areas that we can do that give staff insight, and it can be as granular as which trash cans to pull instead of stopping at every time you go and pull, right? And so I think there's a lot of very specific questions like that sort of arm staff who frankly aren't. That's not where they're professionals. They're professionals in public work, and that's where their knowledge is, but not necessarily in data analysis and then providing insights on that, let alone testing those insights.
I'm curious on the environmental side, like, is that, you said the staff is mainly interested in is that a regulatory driven interest?
Yeah, I think they feel like there's a lot coming on. Like if you look at Albemarle County, they're technically in charge of protecting stream buffers in the whole county. I think they have like one person that's like tangentially doing that. So there's no way for them to really monitor and protect the entire stream buffer system in a pretty large county with the staff that they have. So I think some of it's just like, and like there's a true, like among, Green City staff, there's a real, I think there's a real spirit of like, yeah, we want to do this because it's, there's a spirit of that's very excited about the movement in general. So I think it's not just the burden, but also like the excitement and willingness to like save the earth. So yeah, I see it a lot in the environmental side. Yeah.
So I have two more questions, then we can open it up for discussion. So, and the first one is, so President Ryan was able to come to a little bit of our president of UVA was able to come to a little bit of the opening, the student presentations this morning. He's announced this priority of being a better citizen within the city in some sense, the university, kind of the old town and gown kind of relationship. It's seems to be one of his top priorities. And so a lot of us at UVA, our faculty members, are thinking about that and having conversations across our campus about what that means and how to do that well. And I was curious if, in your interactions with other communities and towns, maybe when there's a dominant university in play, Palo Alto, for example, have you had experience of that being done well? Or do you have advice to us as we go down this path on what not to do?
I don't know. So I know Stanford has tried a number of things. Like I said, there's that area, Palo Alto itself, 65,000 people, but you can get off of 101 and just to get to Stanford can take you an additional hour, which is a mile and a half. And that is just wild. So I know they tried a program of e-bikes, saying that, if their faculty and staff would just take an e-bike, we'll give it to you for free and just ride that for the last mile. So take the train in and ride the e-bike for the rest of the way. They were trying to encourage them, from an environmental perspective. The scooters came out and they've tried a bunch of different things. And it didn't really stick. People just have this propensity to want to get in a car and go when they want to go, even if the e-bikes are riding right by them.
But what about like researchers actually interacting with the community and coming up with research ideas, even or like you all said a number of times, the voice of the user, the voice of the citizen really matters in all this, and kind of part of that exercise is listening well to kind of citizen needs. And so that's a good example of kind of like the university and the city trying to kind of share resources in some way, be more sustainable in that kind of sense. But what about that kind of engagement? Have you seen examples of that kind of engagement with faculty for kind of almost research generation?
I know that go Palo Alto, Mountain View. A lot of the Bay Area communities try to have monthly. They have monthly sessions where they just bring everybody together to try to. It's not really governed by anything. It's just the public works, sustainability. I mean, some vertically integrated organization kind of jumps in and says, okay, we're going to run it this month, and it's going to be this theme, and invite everyone. But that's pretty much it. I mean, the youth there, the millennials and everything, are really driving a lot of the innovation. Very much like what I saw upstairs. I mean, I have to say I was thoroughly impressed.
That was the highlight.
That was. I mean, that was impressive. So I mean, I think it's the youth that is actually driving a lot. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to come here, and it's one of the reasons why I stay engaged with the colleges.
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I've seen, the city ends up being the proxy between the university and the citizens. So as opposed to, I mean, obviously, specific to smart community stuff.
And this is a good thing, or this is maybe not
I don't
quite?
know. I'm not sure I'm the best one to say it's good or bad. Specific to smart communities. So I'm not talking about the university building housing downtown to increase small business and things like that in the downtown community. I'm talking specifically from a smart communities perspective, and when we get into technology and big data and stuff like that. it's typically the city translating what their constituents need and working with the universities, as opposed to the universities having that direct conduit into a city town hall meeting. So, does the University of Virginia participate in town hall meetings?
Good question.
That's where it happens, right? That's where the issues get discussed. What's going to get funded, what's not going to get funded, those are in those meetings.
Yeah, kind of an argument of like these processes already exist. You have to show up to them.
You have to show up.
Yeah.
Rather than create a whole new one.
Yeah.
Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, you all know what's going on here, I think, largely, but I see there, I think there's a lot of promise, and again, it goes back to, it's really refreshing that there's some leadership and vision in Charlottesville in particular for this renewed relationship with the community. I think one of the things we always hear about, because we try and connect university to citizen groups or other nonprofits all the time, and one of the things we hear a lot is like, okay, because one of two things. One, they had a not great experience with an undergraduate cohort or group that either let things fall or didn't really follow through, or they kind of felt like the university whooshed in with great expertise, but just as quickly whooshed out. And so they're sort of left with like kind of the hard work of maintaining the system and keeping things going, or whatever it is. So I think another issue here locally too is I think just trust, and it's going to take time. There's a history, and I think that will be sort of a longer thing. I'm hopeful that organizations like us or others can sort of serve as intermediaries between that, so the city isn't necessarily the proxy, because the city isn't always the best proxy for that. I think there's great optimism.
That's a very good point. So this last question, you could take there's an A and B choice on this, all right? So, and I just kind of big picture question here. Either what makes you most optimistic about this smart cities kind of revolution, if I can call it that, or what are you most nervous about? So you could take either one of those, and I can tell if you're an optimist or a pessimist based on which choice you go with. But I'm kind of curious, kind of your big picture and your view of how this all will evolve, thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And this helps to maybe define a little bit of the research agenda too that needs to target maybe some of these potential fears or potential significant upsides. And I'm kind of stalling here to give you some time to talk, to think, and maybe we'll start with Lucas. Bill's been picked on.
Yeah. I think what I'm most optimistic about in particular is this idea that technology and the openness of data is democratizing how we improve our communities. And I think if you look back 20 or 30 years ago, largely this was in the hands of cities or nonprofits to sort of take and make change within a community. But now with technology being so powerful and with data being increasingly open, I think there's a real role for citizen innovators to start playing a huge role in improving communities. And frankly, I think a vibrant smart city will put them at the center, not just as the potential user, but also as a co-creator in the movement. And I think that's how you end up with smart cities that feel a little bit more citizen-based or citizen-driven, somewhere like Lisbon, as opposed to somewhere like, I think somebody mentioned Songdo, which feels rather sterile or almost dystopian, depending on how you look at it. So I think that's, to me, I think that's fantastic, especially in an age where we've lost our civic spaces, we are kind of losing civic discourse, things like that. To be able to bring citizens back in to democracy in this way as co-creators, I think is particularly compelling to me.
Yeah, so first I'm an optimist, so I'm going to say I'm really positive, with regards to what's happened over the last couple of years and hopefully what will happen over the next 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's going to take a while. So, it's going to take a while to see a lot of the things that we're talking about come to fruition at a mass scale. but very, very optimistic. You know, it's hard to find a city out there that's not thinking or talking about this. So they're all seeing it kind of coming. I think what gives what kind of gives me my optimism and why I'm optimistic is you're seeing, much like in a lot of other industries, a workplace. When you come to work, right? When I walk in the front door of a Verizon office, I expect to be connected via Wi-Fi. The moment I walk in the door, I'm expecting to be connected via Wi-Fi. When I sit down at a phone, I'm expecting that phone to have my phone number as soon as I log into it. The expectations of the citizens are going to force change within a city, as opposed to the city saying this is what we do, and the expectations of a citizen having to basically fit into how the city operates. The city's going to have to operate the way their citizens want to live. And they're going to demand certain things, and the city's going to have to adjust to that. You see it with electric cars, right? More and more citizens, especially in California, where you're more environmentally, sensitive than you are, say, in Alabama, maybe. But you're seeing forcing, parking garages to have special places where you can plug in your car. Like, citizens are forcing the change, which I think is very positive because it's going to accelerate it. Because the innovation happens like here, right? It's at that's drives innovation. You see the bulk of the innovation happening at an individual level, and that's going to feed what the city needs to do to respond.
So I'm an optimist
Okay.
with
All optimists.
with a pessimistic caveat. That's
Make it a little interesting here.
Way to hedge your bets.
Yes. I mean, so being a technologist at heart, I'm very keen on getting out there and solving problems and actually doing it with the eye on the city's vision. What I've learned, though, is that cities they kind of need to work inside out. Cities are vertically integrated, and very few of the vertically integrated organizations share data with themselves. Yet we're expecting them to share data that's on the OT side of the world and become more efficient. They're still pushing paper where they should be digital. So there's as much work to be done on the inside as there is on the outside. And so while I believe that, yes, they're all talking about it now, yes, you can find on the majority of their websites their visions, what they're working towards. The next question has to be when there is a new change in leadership, what happens then? And so the fear is that I've seen in a number of instances, I don't know if you guys have seen this, programs have gotten started, leadership changes,
Yeah.
and it just stalls.
Innovation happens at the beginning of the mayor's
Yes.
cycle and at the end.
And at the end, right? So there's, it's, I believe in technology 100%. I'm more concerned about what's happening inside the city and how they're changing themselves to actually take advantage of that and start doing more, providing more services for the citizens.
Seems to be a consistent theme across all three. Yeah, it's a significant challenge. So I want to open it up if there are questions from the audience. Yeah.
I have two questions. I'll ask one, and then I'll see if there's more time to ask the other one.
Okay, that sounds great.
So the first question is, how do you envision the future of the autonomous car in the presence of the traditional car? And whether it's going to be a problem of infrastructure supporting the requirement of the autonomous car, or the technology itself that is not evolving enough to the level of adoption. And whether it's going to be better or easier to begin with the aerial vehicles versus ground vehicles first, or vice versa. What's your input?
Yeah, so I will say it's to start at the beginning of your questions. So one, I think it's a dual prong issue, right? So the infrastructure within a city. So whether it's sensors in roads, whether it's tripwires in roads, whether it's video cameras on street corners, whether it's the integration of the video cameras into the phase data of the lights, all being able to communicate to an automobile in real time. You can't have delay, you can't have hiccups in the data. Machine learning has to be perfect, has to recognize the images. So I think the technology, both on the automobile side as well as the infrastructure side, are equally challenging. So I think we're a little ways away from seeing mass deployments of autonomous vehicles. I think as you look, and not to sell 5G, but as you look at things like 5G and edge computing, those two things are critical. Because I don't have the luxury of delay of going back to a centralized data center. The data centers need to sit at the edge as close to the network as humanly possible. So I think the advent of those two things, 5G, being proliferated through every city and every community, is going to take a while. Right? We're talking 30 cities this year, and that's cities, so we're not talking rural communities and things like that yet. So I think that the challenge for autonomous is both the innovation on the automobile side as well as the infrastructure. I think your next question was with regards to aerial. So I am a fan of aerial. Because I think when you get into more and more sensors in roads, people are digging up roads. I'm a fan of aerial. I'm a fan of video analytics versus road sensors. This is and I think from a city perspective, the reason I like it is because I can get more use cases from a video feed than I can a sensor in the road. From a video feed, I can do everything from Vision Zero, intersection safety, I can do traffic management, I can do public safety, all from the same video feed, which is compelling. Anytime I can use a single technology to solve for multiple use cases, that to me is a great thing.
Okay, a number of questions. Go here next.
So, I completely agree that the government and cities are going to have to change based on the demand of the citizens and system. It's just that expectation. What's the biggest public policy
Bid number one.
to keep up?
I mean, there's a number of them. I don't know that there is. The biggest challenge that I have is city by city. I go in and they all say, we want what you did in Palo Alto. We want it over here. And I'm like, great. Let's do a camera evaluation. No cameras. No cameras. I'm like, the most data-rich sensor that you can have is a camera. I'm not looking at, nope. It's a perception. So yet in London, you can go there and there's one camera per 11 people, and they feel like it's safer. So we have this huge perception that you're invading my privacy. Yet if I ask, can I look at your phone and tell me how many apps you have on there? Yeah, no, don't worry about that. So I think privacy policy across anything is the biggest thing that we have to tackle.
I'm in New York a lot for work, and I can stand our office is kind of spread. I can stand on a corner and look around and see 12 cameras and look at it. So is it the big cities that are gotten over?
Well, there's one other problem with that, and that is how many of them are working. I've run into that several times. But it's that privacy policy and working. I work a lot with NIST, and the blueprint for that is just coming out this June, and there's a lot of it is in the NIST framework. So cities have to adopt it, enforce it, and there we go. But that'll be years.
I think it's procurement. The procurement system right now is set up for these sort of large albatross legacy technology contracts. It's particularly hard to do more versatile, nimble, iterative type contracts with any different entity. So procurement, I think, could help move it along. So.
Yeah, again, I'll just put my Verizon hat on for a second. For us, it's, we talk about autonomous vehicles. Well, okay, you need speeds and feeds, right? So you got to have 5G. Well, okay, in order to get 5G, I got to put the cell tower on something. Who owns all the assets? City owns the assets. Well, I got to run fiber, so I got to dig up all your streets. So it's having, policies within the city to deal with a volume of whether it's permitting or activity or construction or shutting down roads to do all the construction. It's having the policies, methodologies to move very quickly. Most cities aren't accustomed to, Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T all coming and just swarming them saying, look, I need small cells for 4G, I need small cells for 5G, I gotta pull fiber up and down your street. Oh, by the way, can I use your city conduit that you have sitting there? I think, that's, some cities are better and moving more quickly. Other cities, it's just, they're just not used to moving that fast.
You have a question?
Yes, so I'm a sociologist, so I would like to ask, particularly these two notions been mentioning a lot of time, community and citizen. And so it's like these two terms, it's like we know they're there and we want to respect the citizen community, but it's almost like an elephant in the room. Who are these citizens? And who are the communities? And so, I want to give you an example. So last term, I asked my student to do a little bit kind of smart Charlottesville outreach. So they choose their first question. They are thinking, who are the stakeholders? Who are community? So they come up with 32 stakeholders, and one of big one is farmers, because it's farming culture here. So they approach to the farmer and ask them, hey, smart Charlottesville. No, I want to talk to my students. 0. And farmers, we are not interested. I don't know what you mean. And then it took time for them to kind of communicate, and they got the idea. Okay, so farmers, they are not anti-technology. Actually, they are saying we don't believe urban, that kind of urban farming, smart farming is agriculture, because the agriculture for them is you need to be able to touch the dirt, and there's a special relationship with them and the nature. And so, but they told my student that, well, we are not anti-technologists. It's about trade-off, that we are willing, if we can see that there's a vision that we are going to grow our business and this and that. So I was thinking that when we use the term citizen and communities, they are so different, and what do we mean, and how do we integrate these very different visions into a big visions that can represent. It's a city vision, and we are going to go for a smart city like this.
That's an interesting question. So Indiana University is actually, they received a big grant to actually deal with urban and rural communities, and specifically targeting the farming community, and how technology can help them improve the yields over time, and give them the best times to plant, everything like that. The farmers were like, great, I want a guarantee, give it to me in writing. And they're like, no, this is research and we think we're gonna help. But they've been all on board. So that, you might, I have a few contacts at that college, be happy to put you in touch with them. So I think then in other cities, there's what they call the digital divide, the underserved community, and what they need, and they have a whole different set of needs. And then there's the rest of us, and that's kind of when I think about it. And anytime I'm talking to the city, there is homeless initiatives, there's digital divide initiatives, there's core citizens within the urban jungle initiatives. So it to me it's all one and the same, but they have a different set of requirements.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think user-based design research is really hard to do. And I think one of the things I would encourage those students to do is to just listen, is just say, what are the problems you are facing as a farmer, and withhold sort of like the smart solutions, or even the word smart, right? Like just sort of like, who are you? What's your what the word is, like the design world is persona, right? Who is your persona as a farmer? What's challenging you? And then allow the experts to sort of interweave, can smart technology assist to help solving those problems? Because I think it's immediately polarizing. I know when you come to somebody like, well, what do you think about smart cities? Like, what do you want to do? Like, we have an IoT sensor. Can we put it in your office? You will get the stink eye really fast. But I think, if you're pursuing this user-based, again, design, sort of like a design thinking approach, is really just going in and listening and then sort of letting them come back and add their assumptions and decoding that later to try and frame what the potential technology solution could be for that user. I think that may help them. It's hard to do. It's hard work. And then I think to your larger question is like, how do we put that together, a vision, right? So at a certain point, and this goes to, you hear city councilor or city managers talk about this all the time in terms of like, we hear, like they get told all of this. How do we convey that just because we've heard it, it doesn't necessarily mean our vision becomes that? And so I think there's often a gap, and I think that's largely a trust issue, frankly, but I think there's often a gap between what a citizen perceives at a public meeting. I go and I share my opinion, that it's automatically is going to become policy or part of what the city does. And I think that's just not realistic, because we're relying on the technocratic nature of our city manager or city staff to sort of take everything in and craft a vision that hits as many people as they think is possible based on what they've heard from everyone. And I think that's only accepted when citizens feel like they've all been heard on that accord and seen a good faith effort to do so. When citizen engagement isn't there or absent, and then you come in and try and do it quickly and say that you're not building, you're building on quicksand, because that trust isn't there. So it's very hard then to bridge the gap when you have to implement policy that maybe doesn't match the vision of keeping all single-family residential homes near downtown, right? So it's a challenge.
So when you develop smart services and in the city, these services take real actions at city, do you consider safety requirements? Like, for example, you have a traffic service trying to optimize the traffic performance, or change the signal lights, and obvious requirement may be there should be no collision and all, do not hit on people. But I wonder if you have a list of specific requirements, and if so, where do you get these requirements? And how do you integrate these requirements to your service so that your service can meet these requirements and do not violate?
They tend to be specific per city. If you think about Vision Zero, it's basically to completely eliminate any pedestrian accidents. So, that's a pretty clear, that's what I'm targeting. But for most cities, as you look, they'll have, and some cities don't yet. And this is something you probably have worked a lot with them, is saying, what are your metrics? What are your metrics for success? Whether it's carbon, emissions, whether it's traffic congestion, whether it's intersection safety, whatever the case may be. What I see is most cities, a lot of cities haven't thought through that yet and have clear measurable goals for what they want to achieve. Where other cities do, they are unique on that given city. I wouldn't say, I know I've talked to 30 cities and everyone has the same, end game, except for the fact that, the vision, anybody that subscribes to the Vision Zero kind of objective. So they are unique for most cities of what they're trying to accomplish. I would say that it is absolutely essential that before you start hanging things on lights and all that you have a clear, here's what I need to accomplish. And part of that is from a citizen engagement perspective, because citizens are going to start seeing cameras hanging all over the place, and they're going to see construction crews, and you're going to have police shutting down roads, and they're going to be like, what is going on? You need to make sure you have buy-in. Yes, we're hanging these cameras, and here's what we're looking to accomplish, and here's how it will benefit you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Actually, you will wind up going to city council and telling that story and listening to all, either they'll go, yay, we like it, or they'll rant and rave and you'll never get it. But standards wise, all the equipment is up to an ITS standard. There are transportation standards that all the hardware, all of the cabinets and everything within the cabinets have to comply with. But I would still say that, it's a 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other in terms of the cities that I've talked to that say, oh yeah, well, these are our standards by which we design all of our, streets and corridors with. And City by city, I've gone in and I've said, you know, why did you design it this way? Well, that's the way we've always done it. And so there's a lot of, you know, past history, you know, and the very first endeavor to actually take that data and use it was tough because it has zero context. And that's the thing, zero context. And in order to really, you know, establish a baseline that's going to move you towards autonomous vehicles, you have to add context to it. The data volume is huge. 120 intersections in Palo Alto generate 4 terabytes of data per day. And we reduced that. We had to, otherwise we'd have never got the visualization. So if anyone hit the API and was actually trying to consume that data and do anything with it, it was a nightmare. So we had to fix that. So I think it's a city by city. So getting engaged with a city and actually getting as much access to their ATMS data is critical.
I want to go back for 1 second, just because it hit me sitting here at a university, and we've asked you guys, and you've asked the same question in multiple different ways with regards to the adoption of the technology. And I'll say, one of the things that is going to drive the adoption more so than a lot of the other things we talked about is age of the workforce. It just is, right? So if you look at the people that have been running the traffic departments and the lighting departments and things like that, they've been there a long time and they're very used to doing something one way. And there's no motivation for them necessarily to do it differently. As the folks sitting under these walls start to become those people and start running traffic departments in large cities, you're going to see just a huge change in adoption of technology that wasn't there before, just because simply the aging of the workplace. You know, that's going to change things.
Mm-hmm.
Trust.
I think an interesting dimension is, I'll call it decision making. So obviously there's long-term decision making where we say analyze all the data. If I put 5 more buses on that route, everything would be nice. But there's more about real-time decision making and whether that is automated and what portion is automated, which isn't. And if it isn't, who's actually, there's a human making decisions, so they're getting information, but there isn't just one usually. So there's decision makers all over the city, and I mean, I heard nobody really talking about this issue, and so it most seems like presentations were saying, well, we're going to improve decision making. Yes, but where and how often? And in rural communities, the fire doesn't talk to the police, it doesn't talk to the emergency response. So the decisions, who knows what's going to really happen.
Yeah, it's going to take to break down the barriers between the DOT, the lighting departments, the public safety departments. You know, I've seen it in large cities on the West Coast. I think the largest city on the West Coast, and in trying to establish, you know, sort of a cohesive strategy between the different departments is a challenge. And the other challenge with it is it can die by its own weight. So when you start to say, look, I want to integrate all these things, right? I'm gonna have a big data lake in the sky, and I'm gonna throw all the data in it. I'm gonna be able to mash the data. I'm gonna be able to present it to all these stakeholders, and then they're gonna figure out how to use it. That'll die by its own weight. It's too big, too massive, takes too much time. By the time you get done with it, you're going through 2 mayors. So yes. So I think that it's a huge challenge when we start to talk about decision making. I think you can start smaller though, giving your traffic department, you know, the ability to start to automate decision making. And do I change my phase data timing of my traffic lights based on traffic patterns, based on time of day, based on weather, based on, you know, nighttime, daytime, whatever the case may be. I can isolate it, you know, and say, okay, I'm going to improve my decision making for DOT. And then,
Of course, you know, traffic lights, guardrails are all going away because cars talking to each other.
that was scary watching that video. I gotta be honest with you, I started to get nauseous.
No, but you know what? I mean, if you want autonomous vehicles to actually work, that is the only way Take the drivers
Take
out.
the driver. The biggest
Take
flaw
the
is
driver. That's the exactly.
biggest flaw is the driver.
Take the driver out, and we'll all be fine. You can actually walk across the street that way.
The driver.
But I do think you will, and hopefully universities play a big role in this. You need really smart people that can sit there and say, look, I'm getting data, whether it's social mining. We're seeing a lot of that in cities now around public safety. What can I do around social mining? But being able to figure out how to integrate, use, decipher, analyze, and distribute that data so people can make educated decisions or machines can make educated decisions. I think universities play a huge part in that.
Can I
Because you just need
make
really smart
comment on
people.
that last point, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
There are 4 important characteristics that I like about working with universities. They're cheap labor.
That's why we have 100 of them doing analytics for us.
Your example is.
We got 100 of them sitting there.
Tagging people.
We're gonna try to change that.
Number 1. Number 2 is there's the never-ending supply of bright ideas.
Yeah, it's really smart people.
Never, if you don't like him, the next school, the next students will outsmart this student. There's a never ending. Third thing is, they have no restrictions in terms of what they can really achieve. Really, the way we have lots of relations with UVA, Virginia Tech, you name it. When we have things that we need to solve, we go to many of these universities to solve because they're not constrained by our procurement laws, our financial issues, and things of that nature. And but the bad part, one bad part of university relationship is when they invest time, energy, and develop a particular solution thought, it doesn't follow the rigidity that is necessary for life safety deployments. So what we do is we take all these things, test it and pilot it, things like that. When the concept works, we take it over and we harden it before it's deployed. But the intellectual capital has already been invested there. That's why we have this strong relationship
Yeah.
with university.
Other questions? The questions can also be about the presentations from before. I know you had a second one. You were very patiently
It's,
waiting.
it's already been addressed.
been addressed.
Just a comment on the smart city idea is really very complex and you need tons of alignment between different departments and infrastructure and many things to be able to get the idea done. Because if you have 15 gears, if only one gear is displaced from its place, the entire system is not going to work because there's one unalignment in the system. So where do you think this the alignment can begin with?
Ooh, it's interesting that you say that because I'm not exactly positive, but again, I'll use Palo Alto as an example because they're small. And of their 500 intersections, they only owned 120. So when we were automating all of this, I could only work on 120. Now, once I got all of that to work, I went over to Sunnyvale, and I'm talking to Sunnyvale, and they're like, yeah, we just gave our whole traffic operating control center to somebody else, and they're gonna run our traffic. So now I'm thinking from San Jose to Palo Alto, if I really wanted to have a smart city experience from a traffic perspective, they all would have to be doing the same thing. And so I think that is gonna be probably one of the biggest challenges is getting each city to mimic the other city in terms of your experience going through that city.
I do think it's top down. I think it has to start with the mayors and the CIOs and them all pushing top down. Like
But in alignment.
In alignment, yeah.
There are regional transportation planning organizations that could
And
potentially.
there's great things that are out there now.
Yep.
There's U.S. Conference of Mayors. There's a lot of things now to get more and more get the mayors aware of what other cities are doing, getting them aligned, talking about best practices. So there's a lot of effort around trying to get the cities more aligned.
And I think Austin just signed their first agreement with their sister cities to actually share data amongst themselves. So that was huge. But they've got to be in alignment.
Final questions? Okay, hearing now, we can
Thank
wrap up a little bit early. This is actually the official end now too, so we're not gonna gather back upstairs. I wanna thank everyone for being here. I wanna thank our panelists. That was a very interesting discussion.